things going on in ancient Israel where we left off, and we're going to try to make it to the exile, the Babylonian exile, this morning, and then our last session next week will be on what happened between basically the end of our biblical history until Jesus, and why, and really get into the deep roots of how Jesus may have perceived his own role as Messiah and why it would have been so controversial to so many in Israel. So hopefully this whole historical lead up will pay off when it comes to our understanding of Jesus in the end. But we won't get there today. So lots of stuff. And so without being redundant, I do want to bring us back to one slide I've shown every time, which is that Sinai slide. This is St. Catherine's Monastery at the base of what is thought to have been historical Mount Sinai, and I keep returning to that just as a continued drumbeat, to kind of reminder that for Judaism as a whole, the Exodus from Egypt is fundamentally important. It's central to the entire Hebrew Scriptures. So everything that happens from the time they enter Canaan forward has some reverberation in the Exodus. And it's just referred to everywhere, and it influences everything. So it's just helpful to be reminded of that, and that in this kind of time of wandering, they had built this tabernacle where they felt that God was physically or spiritually enthroned above an Ark of a Covenant, and this tabernacle would later become the model for the great temple, and there'd be a lot of surrounding this ark would be fundamentally important. And whether we believe that that God would sit invisibly enthroned above an ark or not, and I think my only objection is, well, if you think that God is only there, that's a problem. I think God is just as potent everywhere as this. But maybe you're like me too, like you find it helpful in your own life. I find it helpful in mine to demarcate special areas of my house or special times of day where I'm going to be especially focused. Yes, theoretically, God is with me all day long, but have I brought God's presence into my awareness all day long? No. And so it's really helpful to set up reminders, both physical reminders and time-delimited reminders of that, to connect with that presence. And so the Israelites were doing, very much that. They may, some of them may have interpreted this as literally God, sitting on a throne, invisibly. They may not have. They may have had more expansive awareness. But either way, all of them were saying, this is our center point. This is where we gather, especially to listen for the word of the Lord. And as much as politics and economics and more secular ways of knowing keep trying to explain away, a lot of the Bible, and successfully in some circumstances, it's really hard to really do a deep dive into the Hebrew Scriptures without some just deep sense of awareness that there seems to have been communication between God and this people, and as faulty as they are, and they didn't try to, largely they didn't try to cover up their faults. In fact, that's really unusual in the literature. As I said, every hero is also an anti-hero, and the fact that we only know of like one other time before them when a people believed in just one God. Everybody's polytheistic. There was one time in Egypt where a pharaoh named Akhenaten very briefly tried to convert everybody into worship of one God, and that didn't go well for him. And so this is highly unique in human history, that this monotheistic faith arises. And when you cut out all of the other gods, and you basically, people perceive you as atheist, because you're denying the existence of all gods except one, right? But also you have kind of a lot of times, if bad things happen to you, you could always explain it away like, oh, there's some God, some bad God, that's caused this, that doesn't really like me or whatever. You kind of explain these things away. But if there's only one God, and this God is supposed to be loving, and bad things happen to you, now you don't have that out. And so it really created in Israelite literature, more than any literature I've seen of a people, a deep sense of introspection. So when bad things happen, they weren't just simply so quick to blame it on others. They actually turned inward and say, well, what have I done? And now that causes problems, of course, too. It can create this theology, which is very apparent in the Bible of, if you follow Yahweh, well, then you will be blessed, and if you don't follow, you will be cursed, and there'll be these hard times, and that can obviously cause some toxic feedback loops and shame issues and so forth. However, at the same time, I find it incredibly refreshing that you have a whole people, even in their highest levels, who aren't just quick to blame others for their problems and actually do have a sense of introspection. And who of us, when we go poking around there doesn't find something that maybe needs changing, and so they were, that's part of what monotheism brought. And it brought a sense of drama to people's lives that may not have been there as fully in other societies, in the sense that in these ancient polytheistic cultures, like think about the Greeks. We're all familiar, we grow up, those of us of our age, we've all grown up with the Greek mythology and Western civilization classes and so forth. All the drama's up there, right? We're just the peons. We're used by the gods. But all the drama's up there. Same thing in Mesopotamia, same thing in Egypt. But when you only have one God, where's the drama? Right down here. This is the stage for the drama. And so people's lives, they found a lot of meaning in their lives and purpose. And so, it's interesting, we should really kind of reflect this in worship. We think like all the drama happens up here, and this is where it all happens. But really, we are witnessing something that God's doing. But really, on Sunday morning, even God's really the audience. We're the the ones who should be the drama. Anyway, so you got this Sinai thing. So you have this perception that at the core of God's core is an impulse to liberate oppressed peoples. And that just cannot be overstated enough. And especially in today's world where so much of Christianity has just gone so far off the hook that to suggest that God cares mightily for the vulnerable, to suggest that God would measure the success of a society by how the least of these are treated. I mean, that is just such a fundamental core principle in the Hebrew Scriptures, and Jesus shows no sign of deviating from that understanding, hanging out with the sinners, the prostitutes that made the people who were outcast. So this is just really core, and it comes from this Exodus experience, and they were never going to become slaves again. They were never going to let somebody, a political leader, rule over them. As they get a king, that's going to cause some issues, of course, as we talked about last week, but also core to this at Sinai is this covenant, the 10 Commandments, but there's also all there's like 613 different laws in the Old Testament. And it's at Sinai that God, as said, kind of to repeat again last week, at least in their historical memory, God says, listen, I've liberated you from bondage, and it wasn't because of anything they've done. They didn't do anything God didn't say, I was really impressed with how faithful and pious you are. God just simply liberated them. There's an act of free grace. You didn't do anything to earn this. I liberated you. Now, I also am saying it's not because you're any better than anybody else, but I want to set you apart as a people through whom this Abrahamic covenant is going to really come alive. The world will be blessed through you, and you will receive blessing. You're a special people in this respect. But if you want to, but here's a place to pause and ask yourself, do you want to accept this? Because if you do, then because you are going to be a special people, demarcated from everybody else, more will be expected of you than anybody else. And so I'm going to have some laws that's going to be followed. And in this covenant there's made, there are certain, at least in their memory, God is saying, I will bless you if you follow these. And if you don't, I'm going to be slapping you around a bit because I expect more of you. I will bless you more, but I also expect you more. So the Mosaic covenant is what scholars call a conditional covenant. If you do this, I will do this. But they entered into it freely. God gave them the choice to say, no, we take a pass. Thanks for liberating us, but we'll handle this on our own from here on. They said, no, we accept this. We'll take on these laws, and that becomes central into Judaism. Now, by the time you get to David, we kind of got to David last week, there's this story about David wanting to build a house for you. He brings the ark well, first of all, he captures Jerusalem, which had been a neutral territory because it wasn't owned by any Israelite, which is right in the border between the northern tribes and the southern. So he's a political genius. Jerusalem is really hard to conquer, but David conquers it. So now he's got this really hard to conquer capital city. He moves the Ark of the Covenant into the city, so now he's brought together the political power and the religious power in one place. He wants to solidify that by building a great temple, and let's model it. Forget this traveling tent shrine that's going to go all over the 12 tribes on a regular basis. We're going to lock it into Jerusalem. It's going to be the capital. It's going to be the center of everything. And then he hears back, no, God doesn't want him to do that. And yet, God also makes him a promise. And this is now not a conditional promise. This is actually a unilateral promise. God is said through the prophet Nathan. God says, now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be a prince over my people Israel, to David. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and plant them, so they may live in their own place, and be disturbed no more, and evildoers shall afflict them no more, as formerly. From the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, we studied the judges last week, I will give you rest from all of your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares that the Lord will make you a house. So he's not going to build the Lord a house, but the Lord's going to make him a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up from your offspring after you, I will raise up offspring after you who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Not for a few years, but forever. I will be a father to him. He shall be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with a rod. And by the way, here's a son of God, right? This is not Jesus now. It's talking about a king as son of God. He shall be a son to me. Not if he commits iniquity. God knows the human heart. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with a rod such as mortals use, with blows inflicted by human beings. But I will not take my steadfast love, chesed in Hebrew, from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words, with all this vision, Nathan spoke to David. Now, we can look at this politically, say, awfully convenient for David that a prophet says, I'm going to establish your line forever now, there. On the other hand, whether or not Nathan was truly channeling a word from the Lord, it's not really up for us to decide, but what we do know is that this is taken seriously in the tradition from there forward. And of course, Jesus himself, the early church took great pains to show that he's in the line of David. Why? Because of this promise. And actually, what we'll find at the end of today is the exile comes, the Babylonian exile in the 6th century, and the last king in the Davidic line in Israel dies. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, the line's supposed to go forever. What's happened here? So it's interesting. So David, his territory, if you look at this map, the pink there's Jerusalem. I just put there so you see where Jerusalem is. You got 2 tribes to the south of Jerusalem, that's Benjamin and Judah, and then the rest of the 10 are to the north. In Saul's day, that's the extent of Saul's kingdom. And then what David does is radically expands that kingdom into the blue area. So he's quite, David is really a military genius. That is just a fact, especially when you have all these other powers around them. And in his day, Egypt was just itching to come up and take over some territory, but he was able to resist that. The green at the far north, that's where Solomon, David's son, his kingdom supposedly went. I think it's rather doubtful that Solomon was able to extend clear up into Mesopotamia, especially the time frame he's talking about, but that's what the Bible claims, and so that's the fullest extent of the kingdom of Israel, about the size of modern-day New Jersey, to put it in perspective, okay? And it's also, to put it in perspective, they were only a united kingdom throughout David's reign and Solomon's reign. And forever after that, they were not a united kingdom. So about 70 years, they were a completely united kingdom. So what happens is early on, things began to fall apart. And now the Bible will attribute this to some things that David himself did. For instance, there was that pesky little affair he had with Bathsheba that did not please God overly. And you have another interesting development within Hebrew spirituality. You now have a prophet, a court prophet, Nathan, who's calling him out on it. Now, this is unusual because if you read all over the Middle East, and there were always like court prophets, court priests, and so forth, and they were there to basically confirm the power of the emperor. They were not there to say, God's really upset at you. You've done wrong. They might say that, hey, there's some trouble ahead, but you get what you have in Israel is, remember, they originally started like, there will be no king over us. Yahweh's our king. They finally get a king, but they're still like, but this king ain't king, right? So the power of the prophets, certain ones, is much amped up over other cultures because they're still trying to say effectively, yes, we do have a king, but Yahweh's really our king. And so now, from this point forward, you see throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, kings in Israel, and you also see regularly prophets are rising. Not all of them. You still have court prophets who are just kind of doing whatever the king wants. But you have these certain ones, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Nathan, all these prophets that rise up that are not just simply yes persons to the king. And they are absolutely troublers of the king or the queen at different times in history. That's also highly unusual in world religions. And so David says, he obviously a parable, he kind of suckers at him in, talking about, hey, I've found this man who had this precious little lamb, and then this rich person wanted that lamb and took it away, and what should I do about this person who's taken away this poor person's lamb? And David's like, we should just slam the book at him, and said, well, you're the one, because David had taken away the precious lamb from Uriah Hittite and had him killed to cover up the affair. So God's not too pleased, but remember there's this eternal covenant, so God's not going to take away the covenant from David. He's just going to get slapped around a bit. So he says, the sword shall never depart from David's house. This is God's word through Nathan. And David's own household would rebel against him, or will rebel against him. And as we may know if you've read the literature, David's eldest son, Ammon, David has multiple wives, right? So he falls in love with the daughter of one of David's other wives, and through absolute deceit, he manages her name was Tamar, he rapes her. And when this is found out, another one of David's sons, Absalom, blows a cork, as rightly you'd expect, and he ends up murdering Ammon. And so then Absalom, he just murdered the person who's next in line for the throne. And you can imagine that not everybody is pleased by that, including David himself. And so Absalom has to flee for his life. Absalom will eventually raise an army, try to come and force his own father off the throne and take the kingdom from him. And it's really kind of, for him, it's like either kill or be killed, So he decides, okay, I'll kill. That's unsuccessful. He's in one battle, he said he had like fantastic head of hair, and he's riding on his horse and passes under a tree, and his hair gets caught in the tree, and so his horse goes this way, and he's still hanging from the tree. And happily for David, his closest commander, Joab, sees him there and dispatches him. That also doesn't please David, but such as it is. So then Adonijah is the next in line for the throne, so he just assumes that, of course, he will be coronated, so he starts making arrangements for his coronation. In the meantime, remember, there's multiple wives, multiple children here, and Bathsheba, who's very close to David, the son that he has through Bathsheba is Solomon. And Bathsheba and Nathan conspire to, like David's now an old man, he's old, he's kind of fading out of the picture. His memory is probably not so good. It says he gets really cold. And so they search the entire kingdom for a beautiful young woman to lie next to him to keep him warm. The Bible insists he didn't have sexual relations with him, but for some reason they searched the whole kingdom to find a woman beautiful enough to be his bed warmer, named Abishag the Shunammite. And so they convince him that, don't you remember you said, even though Solomon was out of the pecking order, the age order, don't you remember you said Solomon would be the king? And it's like, and they arranged to, the first Bathsheba would say, don't you remember this? And then Nathan would come in and say, oh, you remember that? And whether they were just being deceitful or truly reminding him, David remembers and says, yes, Solomon has my blessing. And so they arrange a secret coronation for him. And suddenly the trumpets are blowing, Solomon, all praise to King Solomon. And Adonijah's people hear this, and then there's some scuffling, a kerfuffling, and Solomon ends up king. So there's one of the promises of God, that the sword shall never depart from David's house, and that's true. The child that was born to David and Bathsheba would die. That's not Solomon, that's another child. Solomon was the second child. So despite David's fasting and praying, the child fell ill and died as Nathan had prophesied. And God also says, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you. He will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. And this is rather interesting. Back when Absalom was rebelling, one of the first signs that Absalom was truly rebelling was he approached one of David's wives and said, I want to sleep with David's concubines. And if you do that, that's a sign to everybody that you are now king. You're sleeping with the former king's concubines. So that was a sheer sign of a problem. And so that's how that prophecy was fulfilled as well. Now, David, as we know, the history remembers him as a musician too, playing a lyre. He first came into Saul's court, comforting him. Saul seems to have like bipolar disorder or something, and music would kind of comfort him. And then a lot of the Psalms in our Bible are at least attributed to King David. Whether they were written by him, a lot of them are doubtful, but it's quite possible, in fact, maybe even probable, that he at least authored some, one of which is a psalm said that is David penned in response to his affair with, and sorrow for his affair with Bathsheba. That's Psalm 51. And it really, I'll read the psalm to you. It really kind of is illustrative, if this is truly from David, really a deeply repentant, heart too. Sometimes those words from the prophets, they sunk down into even the cold political leader's heart, perhaps. But this is the psalm, and I'm sure you've heard it before. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, your chesed. That's that chesed that was repeated in the line that I'll make you a kingdom forever because of my steadfast love, chesed for you. So have mercy upon me, O God, according to your chesed, your covenant loyalty. There's another way of translating steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you alone have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified in your sentence and blameless when you pass judgment. Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner when my mother conceived me. You desire truth in the inward being. Therefore, teach me wisdom in my secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins. Blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain me in a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressions your ways, and sinners will return to you. So that's this powerful king. He's done sin. He's repenting, and in the biblical eyes, God is far more generous than we are. And there are ways to have second, third, fourth, fifth chances. And so, it says, David was able to, I forgot, there's another line. Deliver me from bloodshed, O God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud of your deliverance. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. For you have no delight in sacrifice. If I were to give a burnt offering, you would not be pleased. The sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in right sacrifices, in burnt offerings and whole offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. I do want to note here that, as glorious as this image is of like a king who's an anti-hero that God then is able to work through even the likes of us, that's also been used in the modern political context, with people will say, well, look at Trump and his sinful behavior. He's like David. A lot of evangelicals says, well, he's like David. So, David was the greatest. Oh, yes, that's a big thing. He's like David. David was the greatest king who ever lived. David was Trump was an adulterer. David is an adulterer, and so forth. Okay, if I would say to anybody who believes that, okay, I'll give you that. God works through very imperfect people. Where has Trump offered a psalm like what you just heard in Psalm 51? This person is not like David. Okay. So Solomon then assumes the leadership, is going to extend this kingdom supposedly. He's at least going to hang on to it. Maybe he did extend it for a period of time. He's at least going to hang on to it. And there are a number of reasons for that Solomon had an extremely successful reign then, even though Solomon starts out strong but starts to kind of go off the rails too. But Solomon has also inherited a lot of his father's political chutzpah, I guess. And remember that, as we've said before, that Israel is this little strip of land between two superpowers. Whoever was in power in Mesopotamia, whether it be the Babylonians, later to be the Assyrians, later to be the Neo-Babylonians, but whoever's in power there, and then you have Egypt. And if you wanted to have any kind of commerce between the two, or you wanted to attack the two, you had to have access to Israel, because this whole area, I don't have a pointer, that where it says ancient trade routes, that's all impassable desert there. So the red marks that you can barely see are ancient trade routes, and one is called the Via Maritima. It goes down through Israel along the borders of the Mediterranean Sea. The other one is further inland across the Jordan, called the Way of the Kings. These are the two major trunk routes. There's also a connecting route in the middle, but that was really, whenever there was peace in Israel, those trade routes were open that led to great wealth. And happily for Solomon, now Egypt did try to attack as soon as Solomon came. Egypt under a Pharaoh named Shishak tried to attack, but Solomon was successfully able to repulse the Egyptians. And so Egyptian power, though, was kind of in the process of going into decline. And during Solomon's time, the powers in Mesopotamia were also relatively weak. And so they had some good control. That's why Solomon was able to hold on to the land of Israel throughout his reign. Also, Solomon was very wise in a sense, in that he really believed in having peaceful relationship with his neighbors rather than warlike ones. And so it is said he married as many as, scriptures say, 700 wives. Maybe Solomon was like Trump. I don't know. Anyway, 700 wives, but this was for the purpose of alliance making. That if you wanted to have peace, far better to marry the daughter of the king. The king's not going to attack you then, and you're not going to attack them. So with these are all about alliances, and economic relationships then are established. As the Bible recognizes, all these women also brought in their foreign gods, and the Bible's not too pleased about these gods that start to come into the country, because then they want their own shrines and altars, and Israel's supposed to only worship. They believe in the existence of many gods. They actually do. But for Israel, they believe that Yahweh is their only God. The only God, and even though they believe in the existence of other gods, they believe that Yahweh is the highest God. And in fact, these other gods can only ever do the bidding of Yahweh. I mean, Yahweh allows them to operate, but really, Yahweh is the only true God with any true power, and they happen to be worshiping that God. And so there's all these injunctions about, Yahweh's the only God beside which there is no other God. They didn't actually mean no other God like they don't exist. It means for you, Israel, Yahweh's your God. That's it. So these other gods coming to the country was a threat to a lot of Yahwists, because they believe these gods really exist. They really have powers that could then, if you're going to worship some lower god, you cannot serve two masters. You're going to hate the one and love the other. You have all those problems wrapped up with that. They are a monotheistic faith. Really, in that time, they're not truly monotheistic. Monotheistic means there's only one God in existence. They're monolatric, which means there's many gods, but only one with the true power. So Solomon's he's relatively weak superpower neighbors. He's able to control the trade routes. He's making all these peaceful alliances, so he's brilliant in that way. We hear that's where the Queen of Sheba comes up. Could be likely where Sheba is Ethiopia, maybe in northern Ethiopia. It's disputed, but it's likely. She comes up hearing of Solomon's wisdom, but also probably to establish some trade relationships. Now, curiously, I've been to Ethiopia, northern Ethiopia, and according to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which has existed since before Rome went Christian, they have a story that's not in the Bible where the Queen of Sheba comes up, is attracted to Solomon's wisdom, but apparently is attracted to more than just his wisdom. And as a result, a child is born. And so at one point, as the child reaches a certain age, she wants to take him back to Ethiopia, which is just fine with Solomon. But Solomon is horrified by the thought of his own son being raised apart from Yahweh worship. So he commands two of the high priests of the temple to go with the queen and her son, and his son, to accompany him to teach him in the faith. Well, this is does not sit so well with the high priests, because they're the ones who had chief charge of the Ark of the Covenant, and they're like, be away from Yahweh's presence like this? No way. So according to the Ethiopians, they make it a fake ark. They put it in the temple, and they took the real ark with them to Ethiopia, where it continues to exist to this day in a special shrine area that is guarded by one person who's appointed by the head of the church for life. And nobody ever gets to see the ark except that one person who's set to guard. That's been continuous for centuries. No. But they definitely do. And it's fascinating, how that works. They definitely, there's no question in their minds that that's the true story. And who knows? But anyway, it's interesting historical fact. But anyway, Solomon, though, one of the things, he's got all this wealth coming in, so he's got some money to spare. And so he starts to build this temple for God, and apparently God approves of this. But Solomon, well, you know how if you got a lot of money, it doesn't. You may feel like you got a lot of money to spare, but then eventually, like, you get so used to spending money, you kind of like, I need more money and more. And so Solomon, like, really decks out the temple extravagantly, and he starts on building campaigns, to build up cities and so forth. And eventually, though, he's kind of run out of some of this money, so he's got to make these relationships with, like, Hiram, king of Tyre. He's imported these cedars from Tyre and Lebanon, and anyway, he gets deeply in debt, and eventually, the Bible doesn't talk about this, but we hear, as I recall, but I think we know from extra-biblical records that, it says that Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the Bible. Not likely just as a gift. It's like he's in hock to this other person. He's got to give away 20 cities to pay off his debts because of the extravagant building programs. But also, in order to raise further money, then because he's rather than go in debt, he'd rather tax people, so the tax rate goes up. And There is some evidence that he taxed other tribes more than Judah, where they were, and of course those, especially the northern 10 tribes, were not particularly happy about that. And so when Solomon passes on, Rehoboam, his son, becomes up. He's like, okay, I'm going to be king. Let's all gather at this one city and let's confirm me to be king. Well, there was been one person named Jeroboam who had been the captain of Solomon's corvée, like in charge of all the corvée labor to build all these things, who at one point kind of goes down to Egypt for a little sojourn and then comes back up and isn't with Solomon anymore. And by golly, when Rehoboam comes to be anointed as king and get all of the 12 tribes to confer him, there's Jeroboam representing 10 of the northern tribes saying, hold on a second. Hold on a second. Are you going to tax us as much as your father did? And Rehoboam says, I'll get back to you on that. It says his elder advisor says, no, you need to relax the taxes. We need to keep this thing together. It's going to be, all hell's going to break loose if you don't, accede to their wishes on this. But it says the younger advisors, though, said, no, you need to show them who's boss. And apparently he listens to the younger advisor. He comes back and says, not only am I going to maintain my father's taxes, I'm going to tax you even more. You better get in line or I'm going to come after you. Well, then suddenly everyone to their tents, we're alive, we're gone. And that starts, there's now you've got this rebellion and you've got this divide between the 2 southern tribes led by Rehoboam and the 10 northern tribes led by Jeroboam. And that's the way it's going to be for the rest of their history until the 10 northern tribes, there's a little graphic, that's the geographic demarcation. As we're going to find, the 10 northern tribes are going to eventually become the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and we'll get into why they become the 10 lost tribes. But from this point on, they're a divided kingdom. It gets a little confusing because we know that all these people as Israel, right? But in the Bible also it will refer to the southern tribes as Judah and the northern tribes as Israel. So it gets kind of confusing when we refer to Israel. Sometimes they're talking about just the northern tribes, but sometimes they're just kind of pulling way back, and we kind of pull back and say it's all Israel. And Israel's headquarters at first is in Shechem. Jeroboam does not want them. Now, David and Solomon institute where everybody comes to the temple in Jerusalem every year. He's centered all of the worship life and the power that comes with that in Jerusalem. Jeroboam knows that religion can convey power politically. He does not want people going down to Jerusalem every year to say, hey, we are worshiping Yahweh here. So he sets up 2 shrines to keep the people from going to Jerusalem. He sets one up in Bethel, which is just across the border with the south, and then one clear up in the very far north in a city called Dan. And so he says, go there. And so they create this alternate Yahweh worship, and that's going to cause a lot of gastric indigestion amongst the religious leaders in Jerusalem, many of whom are writing scriptures, right? And so a lot of the biblical writings just can't stand Jeroboam and what future kings, they're apostates. They have corrupted Yahweh worship. They claim that Jeroboam set up golden calves at each of those 2 sanctuary cities. Said, these are your gods, you worship them. So whether that's true or not, who knows, but that's what they claim. So they don't have a very high opinion of them. However, despite that, during this period, it is a time of weakness, as I've said, from both superpowers. And so as long as the two countries of Judah and Israel are not fighting each other, they can keep those almighty trade routes going and the wealth that comes with them. And we know that both countries accumulated a lot of wealth, partly because at some point Assyria is on the rise and they are going to start to be able to demand tribute from Israel and Judah, both. And they're going to concede. And so they're going to, we know from historical records from the Assyrians, so the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the north starts to rise in about 911. It really isn't going until into the reign of Ashurbanipal, who started up in 883. But Ashurbanipal is going to dramatically increase the power of Assyria, and this is kind of so. I'm not going to get into what all these lines mean, but you see like these explosions and stuff that he's kind of going around the Fertile Crescent and taking over territory which used to be held by the older version of the Babylonians. And then he's going to make incursions clear down to the border of Israel, and that's what's going to allow him to say to Israel, we could go further. We could bring our military further, or you can pay us. And both Israel and Judah decide to pay them. And so we even see in the Neo-Assyrian archives, like in the Stela of Shalmaneser III, who's from 852 BCE, it says that King Ahab was from the north. At one point, apparently Ahab joined a coalition of other countries nearby to try to throw off the leadership of the tribe, the reign of the Assyrians over them. So, and it says in this stela that you're looking at, it says that King Ahab came and he fought with 2,000 chariots. So by this time, this is like it's like he showed up with the nukes, like high-priced, a lot of resources to develop this, a lot of resources to train war horses. I mean, that is a whole science in itself. It takes a lot of grain, it takes a lot of sophistication, it takes a lot of land and so forth to train military horses. And so it is a huge suck of money and power, and he's got them apparently, and that it's because these trade routes have been opened, they've got wealth coming in. We also find in a stela from the black obelisk from, again, the same ruler, Shalmaneser III, King Jehu from the south. It starts listing out all that he offered in tribute, and it's like gold, it's lampstands, it's like he practically cleans out the temple to pay tribute to Shalmaneser. And it's in his best interest, as long as Shalmaneser isn't attacking them, they can still have those trade routes open and tax the commodities coming through. This is going to cause a problem, though, because as you have this huge flow of money coming through, people who can stick their finger in that flow are going to get rich, but not everybody's able to stick their finger in that flow. And so the richer people get, costs go up. The cost of, like we know, the cost of housing goes up, the cost of food goes up as more and more money comes in. But if you're not able to stick your finger in that flow, for you, the costs have just risen, but your income hasn't. So the rich are literally getting richer, the poor are literally getting poorer. And this continues to happen and happen. Finally, in the 8th century, this has gone a little too far for God, apparently, at least interpreted from the prophet Amos. Amos is, and the Judean kings are Uzziah in the south, and in the north, Jeroboam the second now. But Amos is from this little, you see where the arrow is, he's from Tekoa, south of Jerusalem, and he comes up, so he's a southerner, but he goes up north to Bethel. That's one of those shrine cities that Jeroboam the first had set up as an alternate worship service in the north. And if you read the book of Amos is only 8 chapters, so it's a very quick read if you want to read it. It kind of turns your stomach because it's pretty harsh in some places. But he starts to preach about in the city, for 3 sins of Moab and for 4, God will not turn away the punishment. For they did this, and so God's going to punish them this way. And you can imagine the hearers like, yeah, Moab, we don't like Moab. Then he says, for 3 sins of the Ammonites and for 4, God will not turn away the punishment because they did this bad stuff, and so God's going to do this bad stuff. And they're like, yeah, right on. And then finally he goes around like six of these different countries. Then he gets to Judah. It says, for 3 sins of Judah and for 4, God will not turn away the punishment. And you can imagine the northerners saying, yeah, right on. So they're all with Amos. And then he says, and for 3 sins of Israel and for 4, God will not turn aside the punishment. And they're like, who did you say? Us? And yeah, you. So this is a portion of that. For thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel for 4. In other words, for more than enough reason. That's kind of rhetorically. You got slack 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, but this is over the top. I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. In the house of their God, they drink wine bought with fines they have imposed. What's going on here? So you have this situation where the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and it's easier and easier to exploit the poor. They're starting to lose their family inheritance. They're selling their properties, becoming sharecroppers. The whole thing is starting, back here. And it says they sell the righteous for silver. In the Hebrew, it says for the silver. It's not translated that way because a lot of translators don't understand the Hebrew underneath that. When it says for the silver, it's like a, what do you call it? When I say like, that pissed me, I didn't really piss, right? What do you call that? That's a metaphoric, or anyway, it's like for the going rate. You sell the righteous for the going rate. In other words, there's a price on people, and it's been legally established. A price on Israelite poor people, like debt slavery. And the needy for a pair of sandals. What does that mean? Like they're literally only worth sandals? No. A sandal was what you used to seal a covenant. Like if you were a landowner, you found hard times, and now you had to sell your land to this rich person to gain a little sustenance for your family. You made a covenant with them, and the way you sealed the deal was you took off your sandal, and the other person took off their sandal, and that was the sign that this covenant was real. So that if there's ever disputed, whoever was being disputed at, they could say, well, wait, I got this guy's sandal. This was a legal deal. I am the legal owner. I got his sandal. So it's saying you sell the poor for the going rate and the needy for the pair of sandals. Like you're saying, hey, it's all legal. It's okay. I'm not the bad guy here. Yeah, they sold me this land for a dirt cheap, and I was more than happy to step in, but it's all legal. I'm a good Yahweh follower. So they trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. They're not likely sleeping in the temple. They were rich, right? They don't need that. No, a garment taken in pledge is when you are a day laborer, you've got the coat on your back, to keep warm, and that's about it. And if you, though, don't get work that day, and your sustenance is made by what you make in that day, your family is going to starve unless you get at least a temporary loan from somebody. And so the way you're going to secure this loan is you're going to give them your cloak. Like, hey, I'm going to pay you back at the end of the day. I'll get paid. I'll pay you right back. Well, the way you'll secure that loan is, here's my garment, because I won't be able to get my garment back unless I pay you. So I'm good for the money. And so, yeah, they're making loans to people who can't, they're just dirt poor. And when they can't be paid back, they're keeping the people's cloaks. And saying, but it's all legal. I can walk into the temple, perfectly, like I'm a righteous person. It is all legal. I'm not bad. And that's this is just a drumbeat that goes over and over and over and over again in Amos. You guys are just completely exploiting people. You're making people's lives miserable, and you think you're good people because it's all legal. Thank God that doesn't happen anymore. So at one point, Amos 5 just kind of blows up. Alas, he's talking about, these are good church people. Alas, for you who desire the day of the Lord. You're looking for the time when, I can't wait till the Lord comes. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light. As if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or who went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? I despise your festivals. These are festivals to Yahweh, right? I hate those things. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals, I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. These are hymns. They're singing the good old hymns. Take their noise to me, says God. I will not listen to the melody of your harps, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Yeah. In other words, despite all this, it's not too late. I've given you all these warnings. I've said for 3 sins or for 4, blah, blah, all this stuff's happening. It's not too late. There's just not much hope that Amos offers, but the fact that he's up there speaking, it offers them a sliver of hope. And if they don't conform, there's some warnings. In fact, the book of Amos opens with, say, he preached all this 2 years before the earthquake, or a year before the earthquake. Well, he predicted there would be this earthquake, and a year later, or 2 years, it happened. So that kind of woke them up. And we've actually found, there's an archaeological level of destruction in Bethel. You can confirm there had been an earthquake. And so that's probably when they start, like, didn't that cranky prophet have something to say about this earthquake? They looked it up. But he also predicted that, some really bad, hellish stuff would happen. They would try to escape, but there would be no escape. And about 40 years later, that would happen. That's where they become the lost tribes of Israel. So if there's anything that's truly God-bearing in this hellfire and damnation kind of speech from Jeremiah, it's like trying to shake this people up that's so deeply entrenched in their sin, it's all legal. So they're feeling like it's okay, and trying to shake them up enough, and then give them 40 years to try to turn around before something happens. So what we do know is that the Assyrian power, starting with Tiglath-Pileser III, this is actually a bas-relief of him. He starts to really build up the Assyrian power. And so this starts to factor very prominently into the politics of the entire region. So it starts out when Tiglath-Pileser takes over, the kingship, you can see he's in the purple area. By the end of his reign, it will be the purple and the green area that he controls. So this is a lot of territory. Notice where it ends. It actually ends with the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom has been, by the time everything transpires, not simply during Tiglath-Pileser's reign, but that will be the end of the northern kingdom. And that would happen because when a guy named his successor Shalmaneser the fifth raises up the north. Let me put this this map out. Okay, so here you see in the green, that's Judah. Up north, there's still the kingdoms, but this map is just showing you Judah a little later in the time of Hezekiah. But the reason I'm putting this up is because it also shows like Moab and Ammon. Up north, you see where it says, you see Damascus clear up in the north. That's the Arameans. And at one point before this map, but still Judah, you see Judah. Northern kingdom is still there. But the northern kingdom conspires with the Arameans, which are headquartered in Damascus, up in the far right corner. They conspire that we're going to throw off the Assyrian reign. And so they come and they approach Judah, the king of Judah, saying, hey, you need to get in this alliance with us. Of course, they need Judah to be in the alliance because south of Judah is Egypt. And so they need to bring Judah along. Maybe they can get even Egypt, but they can, if they're all united, then they could truly throw off this growing Assyrian power. But Judah is kind of read the tea leaves, and they see this is bad math here, really bad math. Like they're going to come and kick our rear ends, and so they're like, no, we're not joining. Judah says they're not joining. Well, now they're really at risk because if Judah then allies with Assyria or Egypt, they could come up from behind as they're trying to attack into Assyria or defend themselves against Assyria. Now Judah could come up, and in fact, Judah makes an alliance. Well, so what they do is they start to attack Judah. Like, you're not going to join us, we're going to force you to join us. Well, that's where then Judah reaches out to Assyria saying, hey, we will kind of double down on our vassalship if you protect us here. Well, now they're in trouble. The north is, because now their food supply, everything's been cut off from the south and the north. They're not going to get anything from the north, and they're not going to get anything from the south. And so this is just a matter of time. You have these incredibly powerful armies with Assyria and they come down and they just go to town. They wipe out city after city after city after city after city, besiege this what at that time is the capital of the north, which is Samaria, and they topple that city as well. And the Assyrians were really ruthless. It's part of why they were so powerful, because everyone was afraid of them. If you signed a covenant with them, if you broke the covenant, they would get down into the weeds. Like, hey, we were going to gouge out your eyes, and we will torture you until you die. I mean, things like this. I mean, like, you don't want to break a covenant with the Assyrians. But they also, if they took your country over after you rebelled, they didn't just simply impose fines. They exiled you to other countries, which is also something that we'll see the Babylonians will do. But the Assyrians did it worse. They not only exiled the people to a faraway place where they would be completely vulnerable, they told the people in that faraway place, free land down here. So they gave away your houses, your properties to other people, so that if you ever had the ability to return, you'd say, hey, this is my house. People say, what are you talking about? Your house. This is my house. And so that's why they're the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They were never able to return because Assyria just imported other people. It also, it starts to see why in the Gospels, why there's so much prejudice against Samaritans, because Samaria was the capital of the north. Samaria then in the south side became corrupted through all these peoples that came and started corrupting Yahwistic religion. So they become these inferior people in the side of the north. In fact, anybody who was worth their salt, according to the south, they came and they immigrated to the south. The south took them in, and so the south grew tremendously in population during that time. Now, the south, though, they are not unaware of the threats of Assyria. They've had an alliance with Assyria, and Assyria just saved their butts from the north, but they know it's just a matter of time. This power is really got a grip, and it's costing them a lot of money to pay tribute to them. And so Hezekiah comes, and this is now the time of Isaiah. Hezekiah in the early 8th century, he starts secretively fortifying and getting ready himself to rebel against Assyria very quietly. A couple things he does. He knows that if and when a revolution comes, Jerusalem's going to get besieged. And Jerusalem is vulnerable because it does not have a water supply within its walls. These sieges could last for 2 or 3 years. You last for 2 or 3 days without water, right? So you have to have a source of supply of water inside the city walls, or you're toast. And so you can have cisterns that last you for months, maybe even a year or so. But if it goes on much longer, your cisterns will all run out. So there was a well, a cistern outside the city walls, and so just outside. And so they were able to cover it over, make it so you couldn't find it. And they literally built this tunnel system that follows this blue line underneath Jerusalem to from the pools. This is a little bit misleading here because you're seeing like everything's walled, right? But the actual if you look at that inner wall, the way this would have been in Hezekiah's time, the inner wall would have been, that's the city of David. They had expanded out, and so that lower wall where you see like numbers 3 and 4, that's also within Jerusalem's wall. But that other wall where you see the line starting up there, that's actually not inside the Hezekiah city. That's later construction. So the pool that's outside the city walls is the one on the right. They burrow underneath, and they without any kind of like modern radar or electronics, whatever, they start at both ends where they want it to end up and where it started, and they start digging towards each other. And you see, this is no straight line. They're having to move around for whatever reasons, but they're tracking all this. And to this day, I've been through this tunnel. It's a half-a-mile tunnel through solid rock. You have to wear sandals or whatever, jellies to go through because still water goes through it. And in the middle, they meet. They start to hear the axes from the other side coming, and they make a plaque that used to be in that tunnel. You can't see it very well, but this is ancient Israelite writing. It says, basically gives a story. Like, we start digging toward each other, and at one point, blessed be Yahweh, we heard the axes from the other side, and they punched through, and we joined, and woohoo! That's pretty cool. That's now in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, so you can see it there. But just in a magnificent feat, and all to get prepared for a rebellion. Hezekiah also fortifies, he builds fortifications in cities, but there's these special seals, these are jar handles, with the king's own seals. It says, to the king in Hebrew. And apparently what he's doing is he's sending out big jars of grain, of oil, and so forth to other cities who he knows are going to be besieged, so that everybody can be resistant to the Assyrians when finally they come. So he's building up all this food stock. He's assuring water supplies. He's reinforcing fortification walls. This is a wall from Hezekiah's reinforcement of Jerusalem from his day. But he's also doing this to other cities around the country. And then finally, he tells Sennacherib, you can take a long walk off a short pier. And Sennacherib does not take that kindly. You know what they like to do to people who break their covenants. And so Sennacherib is on the warpath. He comes down, and he is far more successful in the north. Hezekiah has now kind of expanded out the territory. Again, he's trying to take control of certain cities that are in the north, like Megiddo and so forth, back for Israel. And Sennacherib is just able to wipe them out. And so Hezekiah gets a bit nervous, especially when Sennacherib comes within miles of Jerusalem and to a very, very powerfully fortified city called Lachish. And he's able to besiege them. And as that siege is going, he's reading the tea leaves like, this is not going well. So Hezekiah says, you know what? I've had a change of heart. How about I give you got the tribute? In fact, I'll give you more than we gave you before. And initially, Shalmaneser says, okay. And initially, he's pacified, but apparently not for long. Shalmaneser Sennacherib changes his mind and heads to Jerusalem anyway. And so they besiege Jerusalem. And there's this big account of this in the book of Isaiah and the book of 2 Kings, and also in Shalmaneser's own records, Sennacherib's rather. This is the Taylor Prism, which talks about how Sennacherib talks about how he conquered 46 Israelite cities, and then he said Hezekiah was in Jerusalem like a caged bird. And so he's got all these mighty Assyrian armies who just wiped out Israel. The pressure's on him to give up, and he consults Isaiah. And you can read about this in the book of Isaiah. He accounts, and Isaiah says, no, don't give up. You will succeed. And they were like, how? I mean, we're all penned in. Everything's been taken over, and you got like 200,000 troops right outside our city walls. Isaiah says, the Lord has spoken. The Lord is with you. Just stay true. Stay true. This is like a woman coming to birth. It's painful now, but there will be a breakthrough. And sure enough, we still don't know exactly why. We know some of the reasons why, but sure enough, the entire army suddenly vacates. One of the things we know is that Sennacherib got word from home that while he was away, the mice were playing, and so other people were trying to take over his throne. So you've got to get back before you lose your entire empire. But also appears like some sort of disease started going through the camp. It may be spread by mice. But anyway, they vacated. And so like Isaiah's like, people are like, damn, you are in touch. Like nothing logically said this is possible. You said this would happen, and it did. And so Isaiah is a huge, he's one of the major prophets, right? Not just for that, but that's certainly one of those pieces. And so so that becomes an important milestone. Israel's successfully able to fend off this army, but it also sets up an understanding that will later go badly for the Israelites. It's been proven to them as best they could tell that if they follow Yahweh, they trust in Yahweh, Yahweh will not let Jerusalem fall. And why would Yahweh let Jerusalem fall? Because we have the temple and the Ark of the Covenant, where Yahweh is enthroned invisibly here. Yahweh would never let this temple, as long as we're true to Yahweh, Yahweh is here in a special way. So we have special protection. And it's just been proven because the army went when there was no explanation for it. This will become dangerous later on. What time are we at? Are we 11:52? You want to go 8 more minutes? You can go till noon? No? Yeah. Okay. Then that will bring us to the exile. Okay. So you have this. So here is the Assyrian Empire now. You see that little exception, the yellow. It's right where, this is now Hezekiah's kingdom. Everything else is Assyria, including the Egyptians. Now, notice the dates on this map. The Assyrian Empire, at this farther extent, that's 671 BCE, okay? Now, the next map is going to show you the Babylonian Empire. Okay, what you're basically looking at is the same exact territory minus Egypt. And the date on that is 612. So between 671 and 612, you went from Assyrians controlling this empire to Babylonians controlling the empire. So this is the Neo-Babylonian Empire. They rise to ascendancy, and this is going to complicate matters significantly. What caused that rise? Well, Assyrian power became weak. There became infighting. As we know, even from in Sennacherib's time, there were actually 5 different people trying to fight for his throne. So they go into a period of weakness. The Babylonians see this happening because they're still just a little, they used to be the huge superpower, but the Assyrians have taken over. Now they're going to take back what was theirs from ancient times. And they come back with a vengeance. Now, what's weird is that as the Babylonians are making inroads into the Assyrian Empire is getting worried, like they just might collapse. And even though there's been so much animosity against the Assyrians from Judah, Egypt, they decide to get into the political game. They decide they're going to, they're wanting, remember, see where they're under Assyrian control. They want to throw off that control. So if the Babylonians are making life hard for the Assyrians, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So they say, we're going to support the Babylonians. So they start to send an army up into Judah, and they say, listen, we don't have any quarrel with you. We're not going to do it. Yes, we have this huge army, but we don't have any quarrel with you. We're on our way to Carchemish. I don't think they said that. We're on our way to the north to help the Babylonians. But for whatever reasons, and they're complicated, Josiah, who's the king of Israel at the time, decides actually it's better to keep the Assyrians propped up because apparently their power is going down, and if we could just kind of keep the Assyrians and Babylonians going at each other, that might relieve some pressure from us. So even though the Assyrians have been their historic enemies, Josiah, and maybe because he also thinks that the Pharaoh of Egypt isn't quite so genuine, he says, I have no trouble with you, I will not do anything with my huge army coming through your territory. He sends an army up to Megiddo to head off Necho from the Pharaoh of Egypt and block them from helping the Babylonians. And Josiah is just like really into this, and he wants to fight himself. So instead of hanging back and being with the flag, he disguises himself as a warrior. He goes out to fight himself. An arrow pierces him through the heart, and he dies. And the Babylonians win the day up in Carchemish, where the Egyptians are not able to, the Assyrians are not able to fend off the Egyptians and the Babylonians together. And so now the Babylonians aren't so happy that Israel has had tried to thwart aid to them. And so this starts to poison relationships. But Babylonian now is taken over, and now Israel is the vassal. And so anyway, I think we'll stop there because we're going to get right into the. So next week we'll talk about this exile that happens. What happens when they go against the Babylonians, and we will be able to take it to Jesus, I promise, next week. But kind of fascinating how all this kind of political machinations and how you got to kind of they're this tiny little country in between two superpowers, and somehow they still manage to survive one way or the other. Sometimes with bubble gum and rubber bands. But they managed to survive as a people, not just simply get subsumed into these countries with their own identity, with their own religion, which is so distinctive from the other faiths. It's really quite remarkable. Really, I think maybe God really did have a hand in these people and stuff, despite ourselves sometimes and themselves. The grace of God comes through. So we'll leave it there. Any quick questions before we go? All right. Well, bless you. Have a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy the sunny weather. Good to have you back from Mexico, Robin. You came back from Mexico just for this class, right?
It's a bonus.